Welcome. Thanks everybody for coming to this session. Today I'm hopefully going to be able to help you with a group of students that may be your most difficult. They tend to be a little rambunctious. They tend to sometimes be off the wall. I know there's lots of other words that are used with the percussion section. I won't use them, and you'll find out why. It's not true, that's actually why. Before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and how this session and this list of suggestions came to be. So I've been a performing percussionist for about 30 years, and for the past 20, I've been teaching percussionists in all different ensemble settings. So personally, I've experienced the trials and tribulations of being a percussionist, from both sides of the baton, so to speak. And during that time, and in my position now, which is primarily dealing with private lessons, I've been in the private lesson arena for 7 years with a chain of music schools, which has a reach from students in dozens and dozens of schools in different school districts. So between that and speaking to my colleagues that are still involved in teaching primarily ensembles, I found a lot of common problems and a lot of common issues within the percussion realm. The students are not attentive. The students are not prepared with their music. They're not responsible with the equipment. They're not responsible with their music. And frankly, even when all that's in place, sometimes they just don't sound good. So my goal today is to send you out of here at the end of this session with a lot of skills and a lot of information that will help you be better equipped to manage those students and be confident that they will be great students and great performers for you moving forward. I do have to give some credit where it's due. The genesis for this whole talk came from a conversation I had about 15 years ago with Dean Witten at Rowan University. And I definitely borrowed some of his thoughts in this session, so I had to at least give him a shout out. I want to start with a story. I should give the disclaimer, all the characters in the story are fictitious. Anything resembling somebody living or maybe standing up in the front of this room, entirely coincidental. So the story's about a young percussionist, a young boy destined to be a great percussionist. We'll call him Rudy, Rudy Mintz. Sorry. I had to do it. So Rudy's been banging on things pretty much since he could sit up, and quickly graduated from his favorite toy, which of course was a plastic drum, to breaking his mom's mixing spoons on the bottom of the Tupperware and walking around the house smashing pot lids together like they're crash cymbals. And so when 4th grade rolled around at Rudy's school, which is the time that all of the students get to choose a band instrument, he was fired up and ready to go. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. So the day the band director came in and said, okay, we're going to check out the instruments, he didn't need any explanation, he didn't need any demonstration. His mind had long since been made up. And in fact, when the band director took him down to the band room and let him try a couple rudiments out on a snare drum, he said to him after, hey, is there any other instrument that you'd be interested in? To which Rudy promptly replied, yeah, like bass drum and cymbals and stuff. So, the band director obviously explained to him, hey, look, that's all part of the job. If you sign up for this, you do all of that. So, great. He signed up, left the room smiling, thinking he had just fulfilled his 9-year-old destiny. But as it turns out, he almost didn't have a chance to fulfill that destiny. Because at Rudy's school, like in a lot of schools, the drums is a very popular instrument. And it's so popular that the band teacher has had to limit the number of students that are allowed to be in the beginning drum program. Which makes sense because, think about the racket of 20 beginning drummers in a classroom versus, say, 20 beginning trumpets or saxophones, which we all know is a very tranquil experience. And frankly, if a student doesn't show any ability on an instrument within the first 5 minutes of playing it, there's probably not much chance for them to be successful, right? So anyway, Rudy was fortunate. He had a lot of natural enthusiasm and a lot of natural talent, and he made the cut. So a few weeks later, the announcement comes that all of the instruments for the new students have come in, and all beginning band members are to report to the band room after school. So the bell rings, and the anxious horde descends on the band room, starts tearing into their instrument cases. So here's the saxophone player holding up his shiny new instrument with all kinds of buttons and doohickeys on it, He's fired up. The trombone player is very proud. He's also very proud that he can now poke his friends in the ear from at least 5 feet away. This is great, you know. At the same time, the trumpet player has her new axe out. She's blasting away and somehow simultaneously squirting the clarinet players with that little plastic bottle of stuff that was in her case. She doesn't even know what it is, but spraying that all over the place. And so the clarinet player, of course, is going to retaliate by swinging around that, like the cloth on a string. She didn't know what that was, but that was in her case too. She found it while she was configuring her clarinet in 19 different configurations with all the pieces. So with all of this going on, Rudy, of course, was eager to join in on the fun. So he opens up his box, which is not a case, it's just a box, but whatever. Finds a brand new pair of drumsticks and a block of wood with some rubber glued on top. So the band teacher explains to Rudy, like, that's a practice pad, and that's what drummers start with until they're good enough to play on a drum. He was a little disappointed because really what he had wanted was a drum set. He saw drummers on TV in his favorite band. He wanted to play the drums. He wanted a drum set. But that's not what he got. However, he accepted the explanation, sounded reasonable, and didn't let it dampen his enthusiasm at all. In fact, when his friends came over to see his instrument, he proudly explained to them, no, this is exactly how drummers start. I'm in. Okay, sure. So Rudy did a great job. He showed up to all of his lessons. He practiced all of his assignments on that practice pad. He came in prepared every week. But frankly, he was a little bit bored. His natural talent had started to shine through, and the band teacher was very happy about that, of course. But Rudy was bored because he's playing a lot of repetitive exercises, and frankly, most of them he could master in the first couple tries. But he had to look forward to the fact that the whole ensemble was going to be playing together soon, so he knew those rehearsals were coming where all these exercises would be combined with the other instruments, and that all of the students together would be making actual music. So the day comes, the first full ensemble rehearsal. And Rudy walks in with all his percussion cohorts. They're quickly steered to the back of the room where there's all kinds of drums and cymbals and widgets and whatchamacallit set up back there. They'd only seen those instruments a couple times in lessons, so of course they proceeded to play everything they know on the instruments. They went to town at full volume, of course, and smackdown came immediately from the band director. That is not appropriate behavior. You don't play until you're instructed to. Okay, it's a pretty reasonable request, but still, they were disappointed. But they waited their turn. So by this time, the band teacher now has all of the other students set up in their chairs with their instruments. Okay, now we're going to tune. So he proceeds to go individually through each wind player, playing their tuning note, telling them, push in, pull out, push in a lot, pull out. Goes through this as fast as he could go, but it takes about 7 minutes. In the meantime, Rudy has now sort of taken notice of the mallet players that are standing to his side. Oh, well, he took notice of them because they were within spitball range. And literally within 1 second of that spitball landing on a mallet player, the band director stops everybody and says, Rudy, stop being a troublemaker. I'm not going to put up with that. Rudy apologizes. The band director goes on and says, okay, now we're going to play. Rudy hops up with his sticks, all the percussionists jump up. Oh, no, drummers, hang on. We have to warm up first. We're going to play some scales. So the band plays the scales, and they go on. And now all the people that have been working on scales in their lessons are playing. They're sounding pretty good for their first rehearsal, and Rudy waits. Finally, it's Rudy's turn to play. He jumps up with his sticks. He opens up his book, back to the first lessons that he had learned. He's got these mastered by now. They start playing. Band director stops the band again. Apparently he was playing a little too loud on that snare drum. So Rudy, you got to keep it under control. Now the snare drum's a lot louder than the practice pad he's been practicing on, but he really does his best to keep it under control, and then from there out it's pretty satisfactory. They resume. They play for about 5 more minutes, at which point the band director stops the band again because it's the end of class and it's time to go. Please pack up your instruments. And so it goes for the next 2 years. And then even into middle school, it doesn't get much better. Rudy's got some harder music to play, but he's still kind of bored. It's not that interesting. It's not really that challenging for him. But in the meantime, he has gotten a drum set at home. And now he's learned every song that he loves. He's learned all his favorite bands, his favorite songs. So he's playing that all the time. And somewhere along the line, he's had a chance to see the high school drum line in a parade. Whoa! play so cool, playing in unison. They have these complicated parts. I'm definitely going to do that. And he does. Rudy gets to high school. He auditions for the drum line, and he gets a spot. Now, the drum instructor is pretty tough, but he teaches Rudy a whole new style of drumming. It's a whole new world, and he gives him exercise after exercise to hone his skills. Rudy eats it up, as do all of his comrades in the percussion section, in the drum line. They carry their sticks everywhere they go. They practice at every opportunity, and it absolutely pays off because that drum line wins awards left and right, and probably even more importantly, they win some accolades and some respect from their peers in school. However, when the time comes to prepare for the wind ensemble concert, the band director has some problems. He has to pull Rudy into his office several times, even lays into him in the middle of rehearsal, because his parts are not there. They're not well prepared, they don't sound good, especially the mallet parts. Maybe because Rudy was never really taught to play mallet instruments. I don't know. But they share parts, and they're not sounding good. So this goes back and forth. Rudy's drum set skills are improving. He's found a band of some other friends that he met in school. They're playing parties and coffee houses. It's going great, but still the wind ensemble's a problem. 2 years later, after a lot of frustration from Rudy and his band director, Rudy quits the wind ensemble. Stays in drumline, of course, and he's still playing with his band. They're gigging quite a bit, but he never comes back to concert percussion. And the band director has to wait 5 more years to get another percussionist with Rudy's talent level. And that percussionist, Patty Fla Fla, just as talented and just as infrequently lives up to her talent ability. And if I told you all of Patty's story, it would sound just like the one you just heard. The fact of the matter is, Rudy could have been a great percussionist. He could have gone on to be a great performing percussionist, a music teacher. But that process got cut off at the knees. And it did so in a really common fashion. You know, the problems that we have with percussionists and ensembles are not a coincidence. And it's not because every percussionist is born a spaz. It's because of systematic problems in the way that we train and treat young percussionists. And those problems perpetuate other issues, they perpetuate themselves, and all of the solutions aren't usually found in the 1 semester of percussion methods that we all take in college. So today, I'm hopefully going to come out of here, or you will come out of here, with 9 tips that will help you overcome many of those things. They will range from philosophical all the way up to technical, and I think we can solve a lot of these for all of our benefit, and especially for the benefit of those percussion students. So number 1, give them respect and equality. If you have the packet, if you didn't have the packet, they're on the stand. If you have the packet, you can actually follow along with most of this stuff in there. The first step about giving percussionists respect and equality is to recognize the fact that while they don't have the same responsibilities as all of the other instrumentalists, they have their own unique set of challenges that they have to deal with. First off is a significant physical demand. Percussionists do not sit when they play, or very rarely. The younger they are, the more difficult it gets to be to make it through a rehearsal, especially a long rehearsal on their feet the entire time. Playing the instrument also requires a lot of muscle work, large muscles, small muscles, whereas other instruments, not quite as much physical demand. Percussionists will wear out faster as a fact of life. And the more cognizant we can be of that, the easier life is going to be for them and for us. They also have responsibility for skills on multiple instruments. When you send your sax player home to practice their instrument, or your cellist, they're practicing the saxophone or the cello. When the percussionists come into an ensemble and they have parts to play, in a concert they may play 5, 6, 12, 25 parts. You know, I've played pieces with 18 parts in one piece that I was responsible for. So percussionists have this whole array of instruments that they need to know, each with its own little subtleties and technique and issues. So their responsibility, while they're not playing melodic stuff, they are playing on a technical level, generally above their peers at any given grade or age range. Every part in the percussion section is also a solo. Unlike most wind parts or string parts where there's somebody sitting next to you playing the same part. So if you get in a little trouble, or you have to take a breath in an awkward spot, or you leave out a couple notes, Obviously not ideal, but there's somebody that can sort of cover for you. In a percussion section, that is not the case. There's generally one snare drummer, one bass drummer, one crash cymbal player. If the crash cymbal player forgets a note, we all know that. But on the other side, in a percussion section, there's a lot of teamwork and coordination. So all of these solo parts have to be very tightly integrated. And now things like personality issues and absences from rehearsal become a real issue because we don't have anybody to cover, or the bass drum and snare drum don't want to stand next to each other because somebody stole somebody's girlfriend or something. So, all of this stuff, these parts have to be covered, but they have to work as a team, and it's constant. And finally, percussionists have a significant spatial demand. Anybody else comes into their ensemble rehearsal, they sit in their seat, they put their music on their stand. A percussionist has to constantly shuffle from one instrument to another, bring the sticks here, take the mallets there, bring this music over to this stand, knock 3 stands over on the way to there. So the significant spatial demand, it just makes life more difficult. And sometimes we forget that when we're ready to go, somebody's still getting from that side of the room to that side of the room with 3 crash cymbals, a wood block, a cowbell, and 2 pairs of mallets. So be cognizant of that, please. Also be aware of the inherent problems in a typical ensemble setup. We all know about the dreaded teaching T that we learned about classroom music. We teach here, and we teach here, and we have to avoid that and make sure we fill in all these spaces. Well, in an ensemble setting, it goes from being a T to a ripple. We work our way out in rings. So I want you to think about your ensemble right now and the behavior problems that you tend to have. Do you have more behavior problems in the flutes, clarinets, first violins, or do you have them in the trumpets and percussion section? It's not a coincidence. Trumpet players are rambunctious, we all know that with it. But realistically, that distance creates a huge divide. It creates a divide for the students mentally. The further from you they are, the less connected they feel, amplified by the fact that they're also moving around. It can lead to wandering, both physical and mental. And another side of it is that something as simple as our voice projection, depending on the way your room is, the acoustic conditions, you might think that you're loud and clear, but as it turns out, your voice is only half volume by the time it gets back to the percussion section. And for students that are already moving around and potentially partially tuned out, that voice doesn't exist. If we can project to the back of the room, everybody else will hear it fine. But again, it's easy to forget that they're all the way back there, and they're all the way back there sometimes. Number 2, keep them occupied and challenged. I can't stress enough the first part of this, which is please, 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 whether you're at a beginner band level or they're seniors in high school, please don't have drummers and mallet players. All of the students should be complete percussionists. Are some going to be much better at drum parts? Of course. Are you going to have stronger mallet players and better melodic readers? Of course, and that's fine. And we all know that when we hit the critical period where we're down to 3 weeks before the concert and that xylophone part has to be there, we're going to lean on the student that's going to do the best job with it. But that doesn't mean that the xylophone player only plays xylophone all the time and that the snare drummer plays only snare drum parts. It's tempting. It's easy to put the students on the instrument that you know they're going to take to the quickest. Please give them diversity. Create an equipment setup and breakdown procedure. So when those percussionists walk into your room, they know exactly what their job is. There's a whole bunch of equipment that probably has to be set up, taken out. Assign everybody a job, assign a backup to each job so if that person's absent, it still gets done. Have the same thing for a breakdown procedure. You will find that 1, this stuff gets taken care of quickly and it's not a problem. 2, it may bleed over time-wise into your tuning. If the percussionists are not involved in the tuning, they are setting up and less chance for them to get out of control. The bonus is your equipment gets taken much better care of because we all know the abuse and condition that percussion equipment ends up, even in the course of one school year. From there, integrate the percussionists into your warm-ups. If you're playing scales, if you're playing chorales, have them play along. Either put them on a mallet instrument, let them play rudiments or rolls along with it. If it's a chorale and you really don't want a percussion element to it, have them sing. It's not going to hurt percussionists to have a better concept of intonation. It might, I don't know. And the other side of it is to present challenging materials. There are some inherent problems with a lot of published materials. First off, method books, and this applies to beginning band method books all the way up through advanced ones. In the percussion version of almost all of those books, the pace of progress is excruciatingly slow. It is 3 pages of quarter notes and quarter rests. Well, you're going to play bass drum. You say it's quarter notes and quarter rests. It is 3 or 4 more pages with eighth notes, quarter notes, and quarter rests. For the students that have ability and the students that pick it up quickly, those first pages and thereafter can be downright painful. And they will check out right from the beginning of the process, and now we've laid the groundwork. Also, the material in those books tends to not be presented in a logical order, especially rudiments. I've seen, I don't even know how many beginning band methods where the second rudiment they teach, page 12, is like Radimacue or like flam tap. And it's great. I think it's wonderful for the students to learn these rudiments. We're going to talk about rudiments a little later on. But frankly, they don't need to know a Radimacue in month 3 or even month 15, generally, of playing the drums. So a lot of the stuff is presented out of order in a way that's convenient for the publisher or the author to fit it into the book. Regarding arrangements, we have another problem. And this has gotten somewhat better in the last few years, but generally speaking, in the lower grade level arrangements, the percussion parts are not commensurate with the wind parts. You will have what would be a moderate challenge for your low brass section is back to quarter notes and quarter rests for the snare drummer. And like I said, it has changed for the composers and arrangers are catching on or trying to beef up parts, but be aware that the music that you choose may have very little demand and little interest for your percussion students. My recommendation is, if you can, supplement that. Obviously, we're not going to trash somebody's wonderful arrangement, and if it's a high grade level piece and it's, we know what's reasonable. But if you're teaching an ensemble that's got grade 2 literature, and you feel like, oh, there's a big swell here and there's not a suspended cymbal part, it's not a crime to add one. You can beef things up, or at least provide your percussionists with additional exercises that they can practice while preparing that music. Maybe it leads to building up a skill they need in the piece. Maybe it's totally unrelated and it gives them something else to work on as their weekly assignment. Then we go to the higher grade levels and we have the opposite problem. We now have very demanding percussion parts, possibly with multiple instruments. And the students have usually not been worked up to that. So now they look at this intimidating stuff. They're used to quarter notes, and they're used to eighth notes and flams. And now all of a sudden, they have complicated rhythms. They have difficult instrument changes. They have logistical coordination that they're not used to, and then they struggle with that. So as much as we can work the students up to it, they're going to be better off for it. Number 3. Have them count out loud. The advantage that percussionists have over wind players is that they don't have to use their mouth to play their instrument. They usually use it for something else anyway, usually less desirable. But what they can do is they can count out loud. Obviously, you're not going to have your percussion section hollering the counts from off the stage during your concert. But in practice, in lessons, it's really great for them. There are advantages they can use by counting out loud. For example, they're using the neural pathway of speech, which, and I tell this to my students, I don't care how long you've been playing percussion, I don't care how long you've been playing the drums, you are a better talker than you are a drummer. And that can be used to reinforce the playing. The neural pathways for rhythmic execution and for speech are actually similar, and they can be used to balance each other out. It also will provide the students a little more focus. They're used to reading and speaking. They do that all the time in school. If we can take a skill that they already feel comfortable with and add it to their music practice, that will be to their advantage. It also lays the groundwork for mastering those more complex percussion parts that are coming down the road. The rhythms are going to get much more difficult, much more quickly for the percussion students than they are for most of the wind and string players. So this lays the groundwork for them having a support structure for themselves to learn and practice more difficult rhythms. It also helps develop rhythmic breathing, which might be hard to believe if you're not a percussionist, but it helps with phrasing. It's actually significant. The more we can get percussionists breathing in time and thinking in terms of phrasing, the better the end result is going to be when they're playing their parts along with the other instruments. And finally, it helps develop some rhythmic independence by adding an extra limb to the coordination. In drum set, we talk about fifth limb, which is when we're working on four-way independence and we add a counting element to it. And the idea is by adding that fifth limb, we're going to have even stronger mastery. And when we go back to four-way independence, that actually feels easy. While you're not likely to be dealing with a lot of four-way independence unless you're in a jazz band setting, adding the extra limb, even if it's a third instead of just a two, is going to bring the mastery level up and the comfort level way up when they have to perform their music. Label rhythms differently and logically. When you're teaching, especially at the beginner level, or if you're transitioning students from beginner band to middle school or middle school to high school, teach them a rhythmic labeling system that is logical and that has unique specific labeling for duple and triple meters and divisions, for placement within each individual beat, and for placement within the measure. There are some inherent problems with some of the really common labeling systems. For example, the novelty systems. Rhythm fruit. Anybody familiar with that one? Plum, apple, watermelon, plum. Easy to remember. It provides, the other one is the Mississippi hot dog. Anybody, violin players love that one, right? So Mississippi hot dog, Mississippi hot dog, Mississippi hot dog buns, right? So I just wanted to say buns. Let's be honest here. So, but the problem with the novelty systems is while they do teach the pace of the rhythm, there's no consistency in the labeling. We don't know what beat we're on. We don't know where we are in the beat. In fact, when we say something like watermelon cantaloupe, now we're talking about three of the same notes with different names. So those systems, while I guess for especially young students, they will get them in time early on, they have no concept of how these rhythms relate to each other. If we go to the Kodai-based systems, ta, ti, tika, tika, that is a little bit better. Now we have some consistency in some of the labeling. Those ones aren't by the division as much as they are by the note value. But the problem is we still don't know which ta we're talking about. We don't know which ka within a beat. Take it a step further, we have the Gordon and Takadimi systems. They've now addressed the idea of, okay, we need to have some distinction within a beat. Takadimi. Even if we can go into odd groupings, takadimi-ti, takadimi-ti. So each syllable is a different note position. The problem is still no reference to where we are in the measure. Which brings us all the way back around to the old standard one-ienda, which works great for duple divisions. So we can do one ienda, we have 1, 2 ienda, 3 ienda, the ands are always in the same place, that all works great. Where it tends to break down is when we go to triple divisions. There's a solution. We can't call triplets one enda. We already have enda. Those are in 16ths, that's a duple division. We can't say 1 ta-ta, 2 ta-ta, 3 ta-ta, because, I know. There's somebody, I was waiting. I know. It's okay. So the problem with that, obviously, now we have two different divisions that have the same name. So if we're going to do triplets, if we're going to do any triple division, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, now they have their own unique label. If we're doing 16th note triplets, it gets a little bit more complicated, but generally we're going to go 1 triplet and triplet, 2 triplet and triplet. So yes, there are 2 trips and 2 lets, but it's not very frequent that we're going to run into broken 16th note triplet rhythms. The other place that the standard system doesn't entirely cover, or really doesn't really cover, are odd groupings, quintuplets and septuplets. But again, the frequency with which we're going to run into those groupings and the fact that we're probably rarely ever going to see broken versions of them, where only some notes of the quintuplet are in place, are pretty rare. So I actually still use mnemonics for that. So for the 5s, hippopotamus, hippopotamus, university, university. My favorite one that one of my students came up with, David Hasselhoff, David Hasselhoff. So while we're David Hasselhoffing, we can also go onto a septuplet with William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison. He's a president. He deserves some distinction. Hey, if Hasselhoff gets one, he gets one too. So moving on to some even more technical stuff. This is where, again, if you're at the beginner level, you can teach things the right way and the comfortable way to begin with. However, if you're at a higher level, middle school, high school, a lot of problems are still going to be creeping into the technique of the students, and you can use these to quickly fix those issues. So number 5 is teach and reinforce proper grip and motion. So I want to say right off the bat that I teach almost exclusively matched grip, which means that the sticks match. We're holding the same way. Now, we've probably all seen traditional grip. I don't teach traditional grip in an educational setting, and the reason is match grip is just physically easier to do. Therefore, it's going to be mastered more quickly. It's going to produce a more consistent sound from hand to hand because they match, so the sound will as well. And it applies to all percussion instruments, whereas traditional grip, yes, for marching snare drum, a lot of jazz drummers do it, a lot of drum set players play that way in general because it looks cool, and it does. But frankly, there aren't a lot of advantages to it, and it applies to a minimal amount of percussion instruments. If we teach match grip, whether we're going from a xylophone to a bass drum, it still applies. So I have a way to teach match grip and motion in 5 steps. And if everybody has a pen or pencil, you can even try it along. So number 1, and the most important one, is the fulcrum. And that happens between the thumb and the forefinger. So we're going to use the flat part of our thumb, so it points straight up the stick. We use the flat part because it has the most friction and the least tension in the hand at the end. And we're going to use the first joint of the forefinger. I always tell the students, imagine that a bolt is through your thumb, through the stick, and through your finger. If so, the stick cannot do this, it cannot do this, it cannot do this. The one thing that it can do is that. It's the seesaw or the catapult. Catapult's preferred like 20 to 1 for using analogies. So once we have that in place, that's the motion we want the stick to take. It should be able to pivot towards and away from our palm. And the fulcrum stays connected the entire time. Number 2 is the glue fingers. That leaves these 3 guys back here. They need a job too. Imagine we put a dotted glue on each one of those fingers and stuck it to the stick. They stay with the stick. So as it pivots, they stay right with it. They're not squeezing. It's not held tight against the palm. They're not sticking out in the air. A real common problem is the tea time where the pinky's out. It might look proper, it's not. So as much as possible, encourage that pinky staying on the stick, or if it can't reach the stick, which is the case with some students, to keep alongside the ring finger so that it's at least in with the rest of the fingers and not causing tension in the back of the hand. The next step, once we have the grip working, is to set up the pizza slice. So I'm tilting this. Imagine the snare drum is me. So the stick should be a triangle. It doesn't need to be a 90-degree angle. I've seen it in so many books. It has to be a box. It has to be a 90-degree angle. It does not. It needs to be a triangle. However, remind the students that this is a slice of pizza. If they were hungry, they would not be happy with this slice of pizza. This is a little excessive too. We don't want to encourage any obesity. So, normal standard slice of pizza. And ironically enough, the place where I teach is right next to a pizza shop, which serves rectangular slices of pizza. So I have to give the disclaimer every time I go through this, like, hey, Jules Pizza tastes great, but it's an awful example for drumming. So once they have their pizza slice, here's what this does. 1, it puts the sticks in a good position for their hands, and their hands in a nice relaxed position. It also keeps the knuckles facing up, which is what we want. We don't want the thumbs up, we want the thumbs in. They don't have to be entirely flat. If they are, we call that German grip. Thumbs up is French grip. Most of us play American grip, which of course is not really this or that. It's kind of lazy. It's the American grip. It makes perfect sense. So anywhere from flat to maybe 45 degrees is okay. Anything past that starts getting into trouble area. And the reason is the next step, which is the motion that we're going to use when playing all the time, and that's the wave. This is all we need to do. If the sticks are in the pizza slice and the grip is correct, all we need to do is wave to make those notes work. It's not a complicated arm movement. In fact, we don't want any up and down arm movement. All movement on the y-axis for the algebraically inclined. That comes from the wrist. We're going to use our arms to control Z and X axis if we have to move forward on a mallet instrument, side to side on a set of tom-toms or a mallet instrument. That's what the arms are for. All of the up and down comes from the wrist. And then the last step is just to reinforce the fact that the stick should bounce. We don't want to play down into a drum. We want the stick to rebound immediately. I keep a Super Ball in my room and usually unleash it at least one time while I'm teaching this, because, hey, who doesn't love to do that once in a while? But the idea is that as soon as that stick makes contact, it's gone. The less time that the stick spends on the drum, the better the drum will sound. Contrary to popular belief, you can't beat sound from a drum. You pull sound from a drum. The one exception to this is if you are teaching at the high school level, if you have some advanced timpanists, this may even be introduced in the middle school level. Timpani in this country is generally played French grip, which means the thumbs are up, and there's the hand motion is sort of like shaking hands, and the arm gets involved. However, German grip is acceptable for timpani. In fact, if you were in Germany, guess what they use? Not French grip. So that is acceptable. However, it tends to be that most American timpanists tend to play French grip. I do. From there, once the technique is good, we have grip, we have motion, that takes us to number 6. Teach the 7 core strokes. Almost all percussion technique involved in rudiments, involved in drum set playing, involved in orchestral percussion, whether it's snare drum, bass drum, mallets, almost all percussion technique can be distilled down to 7 strokes. The first one is the rebound stroke. If I drop this stick on the snare drum, what's going to happen? It's going to bounce. Oh, good, we were right. Fortunately, they didn't put me in an anti-gravity room because I totally would have shot that whole part of the thing. So if that stick wants to naturally bounce, anything that it does otherwise is fighting the laws of physics. It's counter to what the stick should naturally do, and it's going to be counter to producing a good sound. So the first and most basic stroke is the rebound stroke. We play with velocity. I should warn you, it will be loud when you first start teaching your students the rebound stroke. You will have to accept that. We'll bring it under control at number 8. So the rebound stroke uses velocity. And the idea is for the stick to hit the drum and immediately come back up. That means the hand moves the same speed as the stick, and the fingers allow it to pivot so that it's free to return. Should I use a practice pad? Rudy would be so disappointed. So that's the idea with the rebound stroke. That also provides the foundation for some of the other strokes that we're going to get to. The next stroke, number 2, is the lift stroke. This is on an instrument that doesn't provide rebound. Think concert bass drum or the low end of a marimba. Rebound is not an option, but we need the same concept, which is that the stick gets away immediately. And we do that by lifting. So in this case, we're still playing with velocity, but we're having to pull the stick back up from the instrument so that it doesn't get a dead stroke. The next and probably most well-known stroke is the buzz stroke. Right? This is what makes up buzz rolls. The idea behind a buzz stroke is that we're going to start with a rebound, but we're going to change 2.5 things. The first thing we're going to change is that the hand is not going to come back up, so the stick isn't able to come back up. So we get this. From there, we need to eliminate the bounces and make it more of a bzzz sound. We do that by pinching at the fulcrum. That's the second thing. And then the half thing, which is that we will push a little bit at the beginning of the stroke. So over the lifespan of one buzz, here's the pressure. So it's pushing a little bit at the beginning, and then it's releasing. And the reason is if we don't release, we cut off the sound. If we don't push a little bit, we get a bounce at the beginning. And we want to get... The goal is to get the longest possible buzz sound out of each hand. And the reason for that is ultimately, what we're going to use this for the most is playing buzz rolls. Buzz rolls work when the buzzes overlap. And Anybody familiar with that sound? That's not the buzz roll we want. Only happens when we have overlapping buzz strokes. The longer they buzz, if they take a long time, we can easily get the next one in there. If they die away shortly or quickly, we have to cram them together, and even if they are overlapped, we get this. Continuous sound, but not a pretty one. Just beware. The other thing that tends to happen is, I see a lot of this. Pull the stick across the drum and get a buzz sound. It will make a buzz sound. The problem is it will make a very short buzz sound because all of the energy that would have gone into the stick continuing to vibrate goes into the stick moving across the drum instead. It also changes the pitch. So we get really odd sounding rolls because the pitch changes are bizarre. Now the next set, I'm going to do 3 strokes that all kind of go together. I am going to use the practice pad for this. Also on the next page in the packet is an exercise that relates to this, the accent tap sheet. And this, to me, beyond the rebound stroke, is actually the most important set of skills that we can develop for percussionists, which is the ability to play accented and unaccented notes together. And we develop it on one hand at a time. What this leads to is obviously being able to play accented phrases with one hand, which of course translates into accented two-hand phrases. But what it also translates into are a lot of the rudiments, like anything that's a flam rudiment has accents and grace notes inside of it. So if I'm playing flam taps, and I listen to one hand, I get this. So accents and taps. It also will come into play if you are teaching in jazz band and you have drum set players who play everything at, and you're like, that has no groove at all of a sudden, you still get the pop on 2 and 4, the ghost notes stay lower, and everything sounds 1,000 times more musical. So we've already learned the rebound. That's a loud note followed by a loud note, because we start high and we end high. The opposite of a rebound is a tap. It starts low and it ends low. We still play with velocity, but in this case, we are going to lightly control the back of the stick with the finger so it stays against the palm. We don't want to have too much wiggle room or else we can actually lose the stroke. Starts low, ends low. That's for unaccented notes, followed by unaccented notes. Then we have the upstroke, which is slightly different than the lift in that the lift can be played at any volume. The upstroke is only for playing quiet notes, but it's quiet notes followed by loud notes. So we start low, and then we whip the stick up. So we release the back fingers and whip it up. Now we're prepared to play an accent after. The opposite of the upstroke is the control stroke, also known as the downstroke. I don't like that because I feel like anytime the stick is moving towards the drum, that is a downstroke. It's involved in everything. But some people refer to it as that. The control stroke is the trickiest one. This is where we start high and end low so that we can play an accented note followed by an unaccented note. And the way we do it is not to squeeze into the stroke. You'll see this a lot. It's also bad drumline technique that I see all the time. It's physically damaging. So not only does it sound bad and it's a bad idea, it can harm the student. The reason is all of the shock from that impact goes right into the wrist from there. It's sort of like hitting a baseball and getting the vibration from the bat. So if you multiply that by dozens, hundreds, thousands of impacts, it adds up. So the trick then is to bring the stick down. Everything up to the point of contact is just like a rebound stroke. But instead of letting the stick bounce back up, we catch it. So the grab is actually after the note hits, but the stick will still stay down low to the drum. So all of this goes together, like I said, in that exercise that's in the packet. And if you notice, if you flip to that page, you notice that on top of the exercise is a label for each note. So it tells us control, tap, tap, up, control, tap, tap, up, control, tap, up, control, tap, up. I forget where it was in the exercise, sorry. The idea being that in order to master this skill, it does have to start in slow motion. And it starts very mechanically. But once those 4 strokes are mastered in conjunction with each other, the tempo can be brought up and it now becomes a musical phrase where all we have to aim for are the accents, because all of the technique is built into the hands. Our last stroke, number 7, is the marcato stroke. Realistically, this is going to be applied mostly for more advanced students, but it is good to be aware of. Excuse me. Especially when you begin teaching the double stroke roll. This is I call it the 2-for-1 deal. This is how we're able to play fast doubles. Has anybody ever seen this demonstration? And so on and so forth. And then the explanation after is like, oh, I just keep making the doubles faster. False. That is not physically possible. Our wrists can't move that fast when we get to top speed. So what actually happens is, yes, the doubles are going faster, but not with the same set of technique. It's transitioned into a marcato stroke, which then has its own transition built in. So what the marcato stroke is, I call it drop squeeze. Everybody has sort of a different terminology for it. But the idea is we're going to do 1 wrist stroke, and we're going to get 2 notes out of it. So on the way down, we get 1, and on the way up, we can actually get 1. And it's a reinforced bounce, meaning the stick does bounce. But if we just allow it to only bounce, we don't get much sound out of the second note, and our rolls will be. We also don't have rhythmic control of the second note. So what we're going to do is on that second note of the double, we're going to squeeze with our finger to reinforce the bounce. So they come out even. This applies, anytime we're doing a double stroke, so it could be open roll, could be paradiddles, but we also can translate that over to triples, where we have drop, bounce, squeeze for playing triple stroke rolls, or probably a little bit more practically in fast jazz ride cymbal patterns. So mastering the marcato stroke, like I said, it is a more advanced skill, but it opens up a lot of technical ability in the students, especially, say, if you are teaching at the high school level and you have drumline students, you have jazz band students, it applies. So number 7, teaching the right hand or left hand lead sticking system. This is really simple. The idea behind right hand lead is that we use the same sticking for each particular note, each particular rhythm, no matter what. It can be applied to quarter notes. We don't usually do that. It's not necessary. If so, 1 and 3 would be the right hand, 2 and 4 would be the left hand. Obviously reverse it if you're doing left hand lead for a left-handed student. But the idea behind using consistent stickings is that it will smooth out the execution of the rhythms and allow the students to read much faster because they're not thinking about which hand to play and getting hand-tied. They already have the sticking mentally connected to the rhythm. So it applies first to eighth notes as all the downbeats, all the numbers are going to be the right hand, all the upbeats, the ands are going to be the left hand. If we leave out a note, we also leave out the hand. So 1 and 4. Right, left, 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 right. Right, left, right, left, 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 right, left, right, right, left, right. When we move to 16th notes, the same general system applies. However, we've now doubled up the speed. So we have to amend the eighth notes in this case, because if we're playing them in the context of 16ths, all the downbeats and upbeats, the ones and the ands, are going to be the right hand. The e's and uhs are going to be the left hand. This is where the system really has to be applied strictly to be effective. So for example, a rhythm like 1 and is going to be right, right, left. Whereas 1 e is right, left, left. Because we left out the and in that rhythm, we also left out the right hand as a result. If we're going into odd grouping, if we're playing full triplets, quintuplets, septuplets, we alternate every stroke. And it means that each beat is going to alternate. 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. If we're playing a broken rhythm, however, then we can go to a dominant hand sticking, which is that it's the same every beat. 1, let 2, let 3, let 4, let 1. So we always come back to our strong hand for the downbeats. If we're playing 16th note triplets, if it starts on the downbeat, 1 triplet and, 2 triplet and. We start that triplet with the strong hand, the dominant hand. If it's on an upbeat, 1 and triplet, 2 and triplet. We're going to start that triplet on the weak hand. Again, the idea is to come back to the dominant hand for all of the downbeats. Number 8, teaching dynamics using stick angle for reference. This may be the most practical of the practical tips. Everybody struggles with forte, loud. How loud is loud? Is it louder than loud? And loud on a French horn is different than loud on a flute and all this stuff. In the percussion world, everything sounds loud, right? So by teaching those dynamics related to a specific angle of the stick, now the students have a visual reference for how loud they're supposed to play. They can see what it looks like along with hearing it. Of course, these are general reference points, so some pieces might require a little bit lower, but at least it will get them in the neighborhood. This is also in contrast to the drum corps style inches system, which anybody who's familiar with the marching stuff, where we play, okay, we're going to play this section at 3 inches. We're going to play this section at 9 inches, which totally eliminates the terminology. It eliminates the musical terminology. And also, when we get regular arrangements, we're not looking at, okay, snare drums, we're going to go through this section in 9, not meter, volume. So what the angles does is it ties it back to the traditional terminology so that when they see it in the music, they know, oh, that's that. So working our way down, the loudest notes, fortissimo, it's going to be a 90-degree angle with the stick. It's going to come straight up and down. That'll get you pretty close. It's loud. If we want forte, we only come 3/4 of the way up. If we want mezzo forte, it's halfway. Mezzo piano, 1/4 of the way. When we get down to piano, we're only talking about 10 degrees, an eighth or less. And then when we get into pianissimo, I say less than 0 degrees. Remember, our hands on a snare drum are actually above the drum, so level is still probably 2 inches off of the drum. So we can actually play below that for pianissimo. If we get below pianissimo, this is where we're going to alter not just the height, but also the velocity. The reason we don't change the velocity, the reason we don't say hit the drum harder or hit the drum lighter to change volume is because we also change the tone of the drum then. If I play high but light, that's a different sound but the same volume as playing low but hard. It gets a different tonality. So we generally want to talk about the height, not the force. However, when we get down below pianissimo, we do lighten the force and we play low. If we're playing above fortissimo, the danger zone, this requires a 90-degree stick angle and also some lift with the arm. And I think I put in there a ton of discretion. Like I said, this is the danger zone. It can be eardrum splitting in the wrong usage. But occasionally, you will have in your music somewhere where the stuff just needs to crank through. We use that lift stroke. We are going to use some arm motion in this case, and we're going to pull the sound right out of the drum. The bonus to this that I always teach is for accents, another sort of nebulous thing sometimes, which is, oh, it's louder than the notes around it. Well, how much louder? Louder. That's a heavy accent, a martellato. It's a lot louder. So what I do is for standard accents, I teach one dynamic level higher. If we're playing at mezzo forte, an accent is forte. If it is the martellato, the rooftop accent, now it goes up 2 levels. If we're playing at mezzo forte, that becomes fortissimo. Discretion, again, has to be used when you're playing a forte or fortissimo and get a rooftop accent. It's not kick the drum off the stand. Find a reasonable place, reasonable volume where it doesn't kill everybody and it doesn't break the drum head or sound terrible. Number 9. Know the 5 most essential rudiments and how to teach them correctly and effectively. We all know about the 40 international drum rudiments. Started as 13, became 26, turned into 40. Realistically, there's probably about 150 recognized rudiments now, maybe even more. Drum corps hybrids and such. The reality is, that's sort of literature for the percussion world. And it's great and it's important for the students to learn those rudiments over time. But from a practical level, in an ensemble setting, we don't need 40 rudiments. We don't need 20 rudiments. We probably don't even need 10. What we need definitely are the first 5. What's the first rudiment you usually teach? Shout them out. Buzz. Buzz rolls, flams. Paradiddle. Everybody loves paradiddle, right? And it's fun to say, it's fun to play, it's easy to teach. It's also not really practical. Because unless we're playing rudimental music, it's important for the students to learn, but the reality is they don't get paradiddles in their snare drum parts. They don't really have much paradiddle stuff in their mallet parts. So while it is fun and it's entertaining and it's easy for the students to learn, and it might be worth teaching in that regard, when it comes to preparing them to play the ensemble music that you need them to play, it's not really that helpful. What is helpful, though, is the first one, single stroke roll. I teach single stroke roll first because it provides the most basic foundation. They've now mastered their grip and their motion, and now they can just work on alternating hands. If they focused on one hand at a time before, we get single stroke roll, which outside of snare drum is pretty much the most universal roll. On any instrument besides snare drum and possibly concert toms, that's the roll that you play. If it's timpani, if it's hand drumming, all single stroke rolls. The real key to playing it correctly, though, is to make sure that the rhythm is even. We don't get the horse gallop, especially when it gets faster, and that the volume is even from hand to hand, which sounds like the rhythm is uneven, even though it's just the volume. The trick here, if you want to fix that problem, if you have a student where it's persistent, if our hands are both working at 70% of their capacity, that means the dominant hand's automatically louder because it has a higher capacity. So usually the dominant hand has to be brought down a little bit, the weak hand has to be brought up a little bit, they meet in the middle, and we get even singles. It will be a full wrist stroke to play this, up to a physical speed limit, which realistically, I'll throw the pad back on here. Even for me, that's about the physical speed limit where I can use a full wrist stroke. Anything above that, especially in fast groups, uses some finger reinforcement, kind of going back to that marcato stroke idea. They almost become integrated double strokes. Number 2, the double stroke roll. We use this because it has a faster top speed than the single stroke roll. Whereas there's a limit to how long I can play that fast and single strokes in a row, but double strokes, that can go all day long. So in the case that we do need really fast 16th notes or 32nd notes, the double stroke roll will work very well. Again, we need to focus on evenness in the rhythm, evenness in the volume between hands, and also what I mentioned before talking about the marcato stroke, which is reinforcing that second note of the double so that everything's the same volume and not that sound. Then that takes us to the drag. Does anybody teach the drag first, second, or third usually? Here's why I teach the drag this early on, and especially before the buzz roll. A drag is a single buzz stroke connected to a tap. What's at the end of almost every buzz roll? A tap. So if we've mastered the transition from a buzz stroke to a single, which is not easy to do, then we've already made the end of a roll work better. So we go back to that buzz stroke, and we get the long buzz, connects right to the tap. The idea being that the sound should be zap, not zap with the gap in it. Anybody heard that one before? Stop me if you've heard this one before. No, actually don't stop me. Got a little bit more to do. So Here's the other side of this, is that as drags tend to get faster, they also start to eat up their own rhythmic space. It almost becomes like an eighth note. A drag is one note that just happens to require both hands to play. That buzz is a grace note. So as the tempo speeds up and slows down, the distance from the grace note to the main note should not change. Not. And if you've ever sat in on the snare drum part of a region band audition, you've heard a lot of that one. The open, closed, open gets really ugly there. The grace note, the buzz, especially on a closed roll, always stays the same distance from the main note. That then, one other part of this. I call it the trampoline. And this is the easiest way to get these releases to work well. If you have two people on a trampoline and one's standing and the other one jumps, what happens to the one that's standing? They bounce too, right? So you get one jump, two bounces. Same thing with the drag. While that buzz is down on the drum, when that single note comes down, that's the person jumping on the trampoline. They both come up at the same time. Leads us then to the buzz roll. Now that we have the release, the end of the roll mastered, now we go back into those overlapping buzzes, which we now have mastered to the point of we can make them go as long as we want them to be. The trick then is to overlap them. We start with just two. And for this part, both sticks are going to stay down on the drum. The last two strokes will always stay down. We go to three. That does require one hand coming up and back down, but they still both end down. We go to four, we go to five. I suggest taking this all the way up to 8 overlapping buzzes for a couple reasons. One, by the time the students get to 8, they can usually keep going indefinitely from there. Also, it's 8 buzzes that we need to play the basic 17-stroke roll. So from there, once the overlapping buzzes work, then we just make sure the last buzz connects to the tap. The rolls sound smooth, they don't have gaps, they don't sound choppy. And initially when we're going to teach these, we will teach them the 16th notes. The 5-stroke roll is like 1 E end, 2 buzzes and a tap. At slow tempos, it does stretch out a little bit ugly. But the principle is there, because as the students graduate to better control of their buzzes and a little bit more advanced rhythmic ability, then we take away the number of buzzes being tied to the length of the roll, and we keep a constant hand speed. So for me, if I'm playing buzz rolls, my hand speed is always this. And what changes is the number of buzzes that I need to fill the space. So at slower tempos, I need more buzzes to get from one quarter note to the next. At a faster tempo, I need fewer buzzes. In an extreme case, prestissimo, a 5-stroke roll could even theoretically be 1 buzz and a tap. But that's not likely something you're going to run into, but it can happen. So then we just change the number of buzzes we need just to fill the space. And finally, the flam. I'm going to do a giant flam demonstration. So if these sticks fall to the floor from where they are, what's going to happen? This one's going to fall first, this one's going to fall after. But the distance is going to do what as they fall? It's going to shrink. So they are going to fall and hit slightly different time. Probably could have worked. Gravity's still going for us, great. But that gap is going to close up. That's exactly what happens with a flam. It's 2 notes, one starting from a high height, one starting from a low height. They start at exactly the same time and go generally the same speed, though the higher one might go slightly faster. What it isn't is a double stop, which is one of the worst sounds you could possibly make on a drum. It's the sort of the trampoline idea. If 2 people jump on opposite sides of the trampoline, nobody goes anywhere. So it's an ugly sound on a drum if 2 sticks hit at the same time. So on 2 drums, double stops, fine. 2 bars on a mallet instrument, double stops sound great. On a snare drum, on 1 drum, the sticks cannot hit at the same time. They'll cancel each other out or it'll just sound horrible. So what we do instead is start them at separate heights, and drop them to the drum. The thing to watch out for is this. Where we get the, oh no, I'm doing a flam. The hidden behind a flam double stop, where the top stick goes really fast because it's further away and still gets there at the same time or even sometimes ahead of the grace note. So they start at different heights. They just can be very relaxed. They just fall to the drum. Now the sound should be flam, one fat sound, not falam. And the analogy I always use is, think of one 300-pound guy, not 250-pound guys standing next to each other. Yes, it weighs the same, but it doesn't look the same. So yeah, we have two notes, but they're not separate. They happen close enough together that we perceive it as one fat sound. Now, the one difficulty, the biggest difficulty of playing flams is that they require rhythmic and dynamic independence. And by that I mean, we think of rhythmic independence in the drum set sense. Oh, I can play eighth notes on my right hand and 2 and 4 on my left hand. But there's also dynamic independence, which means that one limb can play at one dynamic while the other limb, the other hand, plays at a different dynamic. And this is what flams require. So we can all try this. And we'll do a little game. So you can even just tap on your leg, or if you want to use your pen, but you need both hands for it. So we're going to start with the left hand tapping quietly. Now we're going to keep that exactly the same volume the whole time. And you're going to follow me with your right hand. So how consistent was that left hand? Probably not very, right? Because the independence is difficult. And even though this is a way bigger motion than this, the concept is exactly the same. If our hands can't work independently, then flams will not come out clean. Another way you can try this with your students, if that is too difficult for them, is to start with both hands tapping together. In this case, they will start as a quiet double stop. And gradually bring one hand up. Back down. The other hand. Again, we're developing this idea of dynamic independence. The hands can work separately from each other, but in a coordinated manner. Which ultimately, if you have students that are starting with you but haven't yet played drum set, this is going to pay off huge dividends when they get there. If they are drum set drummers, they actually probably have an easier time with playing flams in the first place. So that brings us to the end of our 9 strategies. I hope that for you, you found them to be really practical and really usable. My goal for this was for you to be able to take these back to school on Monday and immediately help your percussion section. Immediately have your percussion students playing better, operating better, behaving better. And, I personally, I've used these over and over and over again, and they've worked every time. So I feel like that would be, the chances of them working for you on some level, in fact, probably really well, I think are really great. But I would love to hear your feedback. On the front of the packet, I do have my email address. I would love to get your feedback about this and about this system, especially once you've tried it with your students. Because I feel like the more we can share and the more we find out about integrating all of these things, the better off we're all going to be. Also, if you have any questions about any of this stuff, I'm happy to talk to you after the session, or feel free to anytime shoot me an email if you have questions related to this or any percussion-related stuff. I'd be glad to help you and always be a resource for you. We do have a couple minutes if anybody has any questions they want to shoot right now. Yes?
I'm in a situation where I'm in a developing program, and I unfortunately do have to restrict the amount of percussionists that I can take. What is your opinion on having percussionists only do mallets for their first year in instrumental music, just so that they can get the physical motion and their no breathing down? Because I feel like I have a huge gap between the mallets and the snare right now.
Yes, I mean, I'm not a fan of it typically. because I feel like, yes, you catch up the gap on the mallets, but you do two things on the downside. One of which is you're potentially opening a gap in snare drum, which may be easier to close than from the mallet side. But the other thing just comes down to motivation. Most of the students who sign up for percussion want to be drummers. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I didn't want any of this, I hope this didn't come off as though it's bad to be a drummer, but you know, it's important for them to be well-rounded. In a developing program, I know there are limitations, and we have to work around them. I feel like if you could go mallet-centered, but make sure you're integrating these snare drum techniques, the rudiment stuff, at least on a basic level, so that stuff doesn't get left behind. You know, you may leave some students behind, unfortunately, the ones just out of the excitement of playing a mallet instrument. But again, you know, remind them that what they're doing is becoming percussionists, they're becoming musicians, and that, you know, things do sometimes happen in steps. So you just have to make the best of it you can.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm jumping on here. I have 35 minutes with my beginner percussion, 25 minutes of mallets, and 10 of drums. But it weeds out the ones who just want to hit stuff with the ones who want to be percussionists. Because I do say that too. But it works really well, and I have them set up both at the top.
Okay.
That's great, yes.
What works for me when I ask students what, you know, the instruments, usually if someone played keyboards, if you have a student already knows how to take piano lessons, those are the ones I geared towards the mallet, so, you know, and then I have the drummers do what they have to do.
Yeah.
I found that easier.
Exactly, you know, and that is a good way, especially because sometimes those, you know, getting kids to come in and play mallet parts can be difficult. Getting beginner drummers up and running and able to play mallet parts and cover things, it can be difficult, and they're flat out, sometimes they're resistant to it. So it can be an advantage if you have students that are interested in percussion but have a background in piano.
That's what I do.
They do have the reading skill, and then you apply the technical aspects of the percussion to the reading skill they already have from piano lessons.
They like it.
Yeah, and it works. And yeah, they feel good about it because it's already something they're comfortable with. Yes?
I was actually going to add on, I actually do auditions to get rid of that. I'm a percussionist myself, and the one thing that I find is that when I came in my first year, I had 4th graders who signed up who could not keep a steady beat for the life of them. No matter how hard I tried, they still couldn't keep a steady beat. They ended up dropping because they were miserable. So what I did, when I recruited, I had them keep a steady beat to a metronome. If they could do ta, ti, I use kudai.
Mm-hmm.
If they could do it, percussion. If not, why don't we think of something else we could do? Because maybe something that they could sing.
You do the same?
And they cut my numbers like in half. So some kids didn't want to audition, so they picked a different instrument.
Yeah, I mean, there is the issue of, like, there are always going to be some students that come out, and frankly, like, let's be realistic, you're going to get more of the, like, casual, you know, dabblers in percussion probably than anywhere else, at least in a band or orchestra program, because you don't have guitar available. If there was an electric guitar in your concert band, you would have a bunch of kids there too doing the same thing. Or now, drum machines, I guess. Yes.
Just your opinion, what would you do? I'm in a program, I have one band, it's 53 kids.
Okay.
12 of them are drummers.
Okay.
I am not permitted to say, no, you can't play drums. We try to convince, but they all warm up together, but when it comes to a concert band piece of music, I do not need that many people playing. So you either have, 4 or 5 snare drummers all playing at the same time,
Right.
or half of them sitting and rotating group A, group B, and other pieces. But there's times when I only work on one piece for half an hour.
Right. I mean, there is that reality of being a percussionist in general. I've played pieces as a percussionist. I played orchestral pieces where I had a crash cymbal part, and I played in a 7.5-minute piece, 3 notes. 1 in the first measure, 1 in the third measure, and 1 in the last measure, of course. So that is part of the reality of being a percussionist, and it is something that the percussion students do need to learn. However, one thing that maybe you could do you have practice pads available?
Yes.
So if you have students that are sitting and it's not disruptive, or if you can even put them in I don't know how your room setup works, but if possible, if you could give them some exercises to practice, that may be an opportunity to teach them some rudimental stuff. Do you have lessons with them also? So if you can introduce some material in the lessons that they can work on, so when the A and B groups rotate out, the group that's not in the performance space can be in a practice space, which may just be at the back of the section, on practice pads, or even on pillows, which can work, obviously not if it's buzz roll related and stuff like that, but even if you're just working on rhythmic types of things, just a quiet setting that they can play in.
Okay.
Yes?
We've incorporated fourth instruments into our beginning band program, grade 4 and 5, and we lined it up pretty much with the trombone line. So they're
Right.
They're doing that. But the warp instruments are very, very helpful if you have some not being used, and of course, what you said earlier, writing additional parts.
Yeah, I mean, that's really a great, I'm actually glad to hear that idea, because that's brilliant, because, you know, a large majority of schools have some sort of ORF program that goes on in the general music setting. So not only does it add, you know, something for the students to do and additional musical parts, but it's something the students are already comfortable with. You know, it's funny to me, students that have played ORF instruments from kindergarten and first grade all the way up through 5th and 6th grade sometimes, and they're playing marimba every week in music class. But then when they see an actual marimba, oh, what's going on over here? I can't handle that. I don't want to play that, because you know they're just not as comfortable. It's not as familiar. The transition should be pretty smooth, but if you're playing directly on ORF instruments, no transition at all. That's actually a really great solution. Anyone else? Great. Well, thank you all very much for this session. You know, I appreciate you being here. And like I said, feel free to email me at any time with questions, comments. I'd love to hear your feedback about how this stuff works for you.